So I just, it's 2026 and I know this is going to become very dated in another year, but I could not resist posting the image that a chatbot provided for me that went through my title. I just love it here. I particularly love that the whale here appears to have legs. That's like one of my favorites. But um, yeah, so today we're going to be talking about designing earth science tutorials and talking about our Julia's and I's experiences with different aspects of creating these tutorials. Um, over our, gosh, we've been working together since 2019. So Julia and I, like I said, we've been working together for a long time, and we work on a lot of different things. We intersect in this area of actionable science and teaching. I work for NOAA Fisheries. I've had a long career in working for protected species, but also I'm affiliate at University of Washington, and I've been deeply involved in teaching as part of that. I am very invested in open science and open education, like sharing educational resources and also creating tools that are accessible. So it's not just about creating. I'm an applied mathematician. I developed statistical algorithms. So it's not just developing like the tool, it's also developing a way for users to understand your tool and easily use it, and then also teaching them. Um, Julie, before I hand off, do you want to say a little bit about you now or wait till I hand off to you? Guess we didn't work out that part.
Yeah, why don't you continue and I'll introduce myself in a little while.
All right, great. Okay. Okay, so in this session, we're going to talk about three different aspects of creating teaching materials. And I think, talking not just about tutorials and the notebooks, but also the other two talks are about aspects that are really important to developing materials that you might not, or developing and delivering. So Julie is going to talk about governance and maintenance and how that has looked like for the NASA OpenScapes mentor group from the NASA DAX. And then talk three, I am going to talk about creating experiential learning journeys using storyboarding. And this is a really fun example of, I think, one of my best short workshops that I did. But I'm going to start off with the notebook example. So I have, like I said, I've been teaching for a really long time, and I got into doing hack weeks around 2021. I was a participant in a hack week that was run by Julia and the NASA OpenScapes mentors. I think I saw some of your names on here. And then I got really like inspired by that. I've always enjoyed doing experiential learning in teaching, and the hack week was that on steroids. So after I did that, felt like I want to learn how to do this, but I certainly wasn't ready to jump into doing that. It was clearly had a lot to learn before I was ran these. So the next one I did is I did a hack week by the University of Washington eScience group, and they have done a lot of hack weeks, and they are really good at it, have a lot of experience, and they're extremely generous in helping people learn how to do these. So I participated as a participant in that one, just a participant. I really embedded in a project. And then I reached out to them afterwards and asked if I could join as a mentor at another Hack Week. I don't work on cryo stuff or snow. I'm fisheries ocean person, but I was attending these as a learner for myself. Even though I had a lot of experience teaching, did not have a lot of experience with Hack Weeks. And so I acted as a mentor for SnowX, and this was really interesting. I was a mentor for teaching Git and GitHub, and I learned a tremendous amount about helping people get up to speed to that really quickly who are coming from no experience at all. And then after that, I started more in delivering the technical content for Ocean Hack Week and being a project mentor. And then it took me maybe 4 of these getting involved that I then stepped into the lead organizer role. Here I am. This was a 2-week Hack Week that I ran in India. This was one of the teams. We had like 60 people together for 2 weeks. This was incredibly fun and a really great team of instructors. This is one of the main instructors here with me. And then I went on to being on the organizer team for a series of other Hack Weeks. And then I have another big one next week. All right. So I wanted to go through that and just, through that experience, I have watched a lot of people interact with our content and our tutorials and watched how people learn, because these Hack Weeks that I have been involved with, they are bringing in people who don't have any experience with the material often or limited experience. And, as I was preparing this material, I was thinking about what were really successful tutorials that we have created and why were they successful? And so another piece of how I come at this and my experience is that I have taught skiing for over 30 years. And I also coach coaches. I teach instructors how to teach skills. And this diagram here is a diagram that we teach from in the Professional Ski Instructors of America. But I think it's a really good framework for all kinds of teaching of skills, including technical skills, like teaching people skills for accessing and working with Earth data. And this is a diagram to capture the idea of a student-centered instruction. And what that means is that you think of the student at the center and what their needs are and understanding kind of where they're coming from and how they're doing during your lesson. As opposed to, say, you put together the content for the lesson and you just hey, this is the content that I'm teaching. If you're ready for it, you're ready for it. If you're not, well, work harder. So when we're thinking about this, the student-centered lesson, as instructors, we're bringing a lot of skills besides just our technical skills. So the technical skill would be you are your technical knowledge as you're writing, the code and the instructions about how to access some, say, Earth data. I'm going to show an example in a bit. So all that technical stuff. So that's just one piece. And, often when we're developing the content, when I'm developing the content, I'm really thinking about my technical skills. But when I'm moving into delivering that, I have to, and then, really how you're scaffolding it, think about lean on people skills and the teaching skills. And these are just as important as the technical knowledge that you have. So speaking of like teaching skills, I think this diagram to me is the most important thing I think about while I'm designing any kind of learning experience. So a notebook that let's say a Jupyter notebook I'm creating is a learning experience. And it's this diagram right here. And so this is this, here on this axis, you have the skill difficulty, how hard is it? And then the learner's skill level. So if your skill level is high, skills over here might be like super easy for you. And if you were doing that skill, you wouldn't be learning very much. But if your learner is a ranked beginner, that same skill that feels dead easy to you is really difficult for them. Okay, so that's obvious. But as an instructor, you have to be really aware of this and try not to end up in the land of frustration and unhappiness. And it's super, super easy to go immediately to frustration and unhappiness in your learners. If you don't recognize what is a skill for them, what are things they've never done before, and you're jumping very quickly ahead and too fast for them, and a bunch of them get into frustration and unhappiness, and their learning goes down. So you want to stay in this area where it's easy for them to learn. And I think that oftentimes, like when I'm helping people develop material, they are concerned about this part. They're oh no, people are going to get bored, so I got to cram more and more in there so that they're not up here. And people getting bored, I would say that is not such a big issue. You can still learn when you're bored, or maybe it's going a little slow for you. You can jump ahead. Nowadays, you can like work on something else at the same time. But if you get into frustration and unhappiness for your learners, or at least a fair segment of them, they just can't learn anymore. Okay, so how do you stay in this area and keep your learners out of frustration and unhappiness? And I think these are, to me, the key things that I work on with coaches. And first is to isolate skills. And that requires recognizing what is, in fact, a skill for your learners. I'll show some concrete examples in just a moment. And then you're going to break down those skills and work on easiest skills, progressively. And then this last thing is really important. You kind of got to count how many skills you're having them learn. And when you start getting up to like 10, 12, 15, way too many for a learning session. Keeping it more to 5 to 7 is, in my experience, kind of the sweet spot. Okay, so let's see some a couple concrete examples. One, I'm going to show you a notebook in a moment, but here I'm going to start with how I teach Git to scientists. So let's say I'm teaching Git to someone who's never used Git before. So I, as someone who uses it all the time, I go onto the terminal, I write little commands, sure, all the time. That's like a super easy thing to me. But also, I've been programming all my life. I work from the terminal all the time. My learners, if I'm working with scientists, I've got a pretty good idea. A lot of them don't work from the terminal. So the terminal is a skill for them. And is it my objective to teach them a terminal that day? No, that's not my objective. If my objective is I'm teaching them Git, and I'm ranking the skills I want them to learn, sure. Working with terminal, that might help them, but that's really not the top skill that I'm trying to teach. So what I want to do is I want to get them right into what I think are the key skills and remove any other skills that they have to do. Because remember, I got to keep them down to 5 to 7 skills in this learning activity. So I want to remove any kind of authentication skills, any interact with the terminal skills, any remove what UI is the user on headaches. And then, so I start with just github.com. So you think, well, what can you actually teach them with that? Well, for a very new user, they've never done version control. They've never done edit commit. And if I'm going to get them to do that later, either from a terminal or for some UI on their computer, I need them to learn that skill first. I can isolate that skill. So that's what I'm doing. I've identified that as a skill, and now I'm going to try to get them to do that skill, edit, commit, in a way where they can do it really simply. So they're doing it on GitHub. And I also know, like having done this a bunch, that my success rate is basically 100% on GitHub. So I have a high success rate. Whereas if I were trying to do that in a UI, like on anything else, or from like a terminal, my success rate, I can guarantee you, would be less than 50%. So this is a key thing too, is like really being really honest about what's the success rate in the skill. Trying to design it so your success rate is high. All right. And then let's switch for a moment here on designing notebooks. So that was an example. I just want to show that Git example because, an example of how you break down the skills and decide what's a key skill and then just focus on that skill. So let's now talk about something more complicated where you're designing a notebook. So I'm going to show you a Jupyter notebook. And here are some things that we do in Hack Weeks. And here I'm saying these are Hack Week teams for lots of various Hack Weeks that I've been part of. And these are really common things that we do. First off, we put the learning objectives up top. And I think that's really important for the instructor. That helps you make sure you're not trying to teach too much and helps you focus on the learning objectives. It's so easy to tack more and more on, but this, but that. And I think as a teacher, that makes it harder for people to learn. So you have to discipline yourself, and having these objectives, I think, helps the instructor. Another thing, and this one can be really hard across a team that's creating material, is getting on the same page and doing things one way. And, resisting the urge to show users all the 5 different ways that they could do things. I think this is one of the hardest things that I think, even thinking about it makes me a little uncomfortable, because on your teaching team, you're going to have to navigate disagreements about little simple things about how you do things. So not like major things, just those minor syntax things. And it can be, I think it's really, really important for the learners to not see keep changing the way you're doing things, even like slightly different ways. I'll show you an example in a moment. Repetition of how you do things. So these things kind of go together. So doing that, and then showing the science is super important to keep people engaged. So they're like, yeah, you can do really cool stuff, but not showing them all the code, kind of glossing over that. So you make a kind of a transition from skills to, hey, now let's see some cool stuff. Okay. So I'm going to show you just walk through very quickly. last couple minutes here of some material that we are developing for a Hack Week that we're doing next week. This is on using PACE hyperspectral ocean color data. So this is ocean color where we have lots of different spectra. So let's hop here. Okay. Let's see. Do you guys see my browser, or are you still seeing PowerPoint?
We're still seeing PowerPoint.
Excellent. Okay. So, stop sharing. Chrome tab. Okay, here we go here. Okay. All right. So let me throw this into the chat. Okay. Okay. So here we are. That's the link I put in the chat is where I am right now. And on here, you can see our tutorials. And during our Hack Week, we do use a Jupyter Hub, but to make it easier to access our materials, we have also been kind of creating a little bit simpler material that runs in Colab to make it easier for people who to come back to later, or well, maybe we can talk about this later. We have this whole thing about how do we fledge people, how, because we use Jupyter Hubs a lot. How do we get them off that? And so I've been experimenting with always creating a Colab link to help with that, like fledging. Okay, so here's an example of a notebook that we'll be using very early on in the Hack Week next week. So this is, I think, day 1. So what we need is the users need to learn how to get this hyperspectral data and find files, and then they're going to use it in their projects. So these are really core. This is a core skill they will need for their projects. So here we go. So I put the learning objectives up front. So these are the things that I'm going to teach them. And actually, the main thing is kind of 1 through 4. And then we'll kind of take a little bit of a pause there. I'm not going to go through 5, but when I'm delivering this, going to take a little bit of a pause and answer questions, let people catch up a little before I go into this part, which is actually a little more complicated. Okay, so the way we provide this, we're not having the students write any code. They can just click things. And here's an example where I'm giving the instructions for how the student will run this in Colab. So, here, if you're running Colab, uncomment and run this line. So here's an example of where I'm thinking about where my students are coming from. Will they know that hashtag is a comment? Maybe not, right? And then that seems like a little thing. But when you're teaching, that could hang up my users immediately. If they get stuck, if they read that, and the first thing they're like, how do I do that? So, I'm reminding them, remove that hashtag. And when I show this, I'm going to be like going here, and I'm going to click this. I'm going to be walking through kind of slowly. And I know, like, it feels like when you're teaching, like, well, why not just do it fast? But you remember, like, especially in the beginning, like not losing people. The other thing is when I'm delivering this, I'm not going to use shortcuts to run cells. So I could just do shift return, but my learners who've never seen this before don't know those shortcuts. So I'm going to force myself to roll over, and I'll say, here, and they've never done this, so yeah, I'm going to tell them. So here, I got rid of that, and now I'm going to roll over this, and I'm going to click this. Go ahead, run that. All right. Okay. So, and then the second one, I'm not going to run each of these. I'm going to kind of talk through a little bit of the construction here. So, here, same thing. When I run this, I'm going to run and I'm going to use that. This is something as an instructor, if you work with, whatever platform you're working with all the time, it is so easy to go too fast. It is so easy to, you'll get on autopilot. And so like figuring out ways to get yourself off autopilot is really important. Okay, so I'm going to walk, I walk them through, and then let me show you how. So here, right, I'm, breaking down and going through each of these skills and only those skills. And this, to get this to look like this, it took many edits. We had so much extra material in there. Well, this was mine. I had so much extra stuff in there. So cutting out, like, what's that extra aside that I put in there? Cutting that out, right? Just focus on the objectives here. So search, and then kind of walk them through this, and then once I get done, this is the key thing. So getting here and pausing and giving them a summary of what we just learned, and then reiterating what the code looks like to do this thing. And throughout the rest of the material, we'll use exactly this format whenever we are doing this thing where we're searching. So that's an example where we're repeating the same code block over and over again. I'll also, when I edit it and I go through, I try to make it, look the same. So it's not temporal, short name, granule. I try to do it exactly the same. So your learners are getting this repetition. All right. Let me go on back to, I'm going to stop showing that and get us back to here. And I'm about to hand off to you, Julie. Okay, do you see my PowerPoint?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. Great. Okay, so you're welcome to go through those tutorials and see the examples. They're very close to finished at this point. One bit to see is when you look at our look at the tutorial example, towards the bottom, we start doing more complicated things. And when presenting this, I'm going to pause, and it's kind of like, okay, we're done skill learning now. Now you're in watch mode. Okay, so some practical strategies, things that are hard from experience to do. Pausing a lot for comprehension checks. And I find, when I'm teaching people how to teach, that it's really hard for people to do that. And you often, a thing that I think works is using structure to force yourself to slow down. So putting in some demos or putting in some Q&As, or creating breakout rooms where people can go and get help if they get stuck. So kinds of structure to really slow things down. And being especially wary about, as you're getting in, like test out your tutorial and see if a ranked beginner runs into any hiccups. And if you can smooth out those hiccups and get people running code more quickly, my experience, they learn a lot better. Lately now, I also really lean into AI, and I embrace it as a teaching tool, and I show them examples of kinds of prompts that I might use AI with. So here's an actual like prompt. So I'll show them some examples of that and really encourage them to use that. I also show them like how to use AI to teach you code. So putting code in and say, hey, explain this code to me, because they might not have done that before. Okay, and then to finish off, here's some, advice I have for instructors for learning. I would say key thing is support yourself as a learner, as someone who's learning how to develop material. The carpentry's instructor training is really great. A lot of people I've worked with have done that, and so I highly recommend that. If you can't get into the instructor training, I would say just taking one of the carpentry's trainings and kind of watch how they teach things. And speaking of watching how people teach, I will often seek out workshops or hack weeks where I know somebody who's a really seasoned instructor is teaching, to watch how they construct things and how they deliver things. So I'm taking notes about the teaching, even if the material might be something that I already know. All right, I'm going to stop there. Stop sharing. All right, I think we have time for a question or two. If there's any questions or comments.
It looks like there's some coming in the chat.
Yeah, so the question's about asking them to write code from scratch. And this is speaking from my experience, working in in these Hack Week situations or in workshops. And I just have to say, I've never seen anyone pull that off, where people learn, unless we're learning something like basic coding. That's totally different. Like I'm teaching you like basic, like how to write basic Python code. Yes, I am having you write your own code, right? That. But these kind of notebooks that we're teaching people to access Earth data, we've tried, or I've seen people try to have them write the code, and I don't know. Yeah, I haven't seen it pulled off well in that kind of setting. For the 5 to 7 skills, is the guidelines for a 1 hour or another time frame? Yeah, so that's kind of for your learning chunk. Like, okay, I'm going to deliver this chunk of material, and these are in this chunk of learning, which I would say is more like a 30-minute learning, and then we're doing kind of experiential, like you've got some activity, and I guess in the activity they are writing code or running code or whatever they want. So in that kind of 35-minute block. Yeah.
We've got a couple other. So do you ever record yourself teaching and watch that?
I don't, because I might never teach again if I did that. I might be so mortified. And I wish I were stronger than that, but yeah. I do record myself all the time, because I do post the recordings of trainings. But I do take notes. And I do post teaching kind of reviews of like, what was I trying to do and what did I do? and evaluate what did I do well, what did I not do well, what like I especially when I was learning to teach, I did a lot of experimentation of how to construct things, how to construct lessons in different ways. And so there was a lot of post teaching self evaluation that really helped me early on.
Nice. There's another, how do you manage the no learner left behind idea?
Yeah. So, and Luis also noted there, it's really hard when the skill level in the audience are very different. Yeah, that is very hard. And so, okay, so a few different thoughts on that. One is when you are designing the event, decide if you want to deal with that, if that's a goal or not. It is okay to set the expectations about the skills of the students, right? And to be very clear, hey, you need to come in with this. And for some of the hack weeks I've been a part of, like they have a very high bar in terms of the skills you have to come in with, and you're just not selected if you don't meet that bar. So that's one way to deal with it, is try to limit the skill level or raise the bar. Or you can lower the bar. You can say, this is for people who have no experience at all. And you be very, very clear. So I think that to me is the first thing, is to make it clear who the audience is for, or who the material is for. You can also say the material is for all skill levels. And I do teach events like that. The event I have next week is for that. When you are doing something like that, you need some serious scaffolding to help you out. So what's an example of that? An example of that is building in big breaks and say you have a lot of helpers and you say, all right, if you are stuck, go into this breakout room. Or, hey, if you're stuck, raise your hand and people will come and help you. So you use some kind of technique to deal with the people who are really stuck. You can also make sure the activities are team and peer activities so that the people who are more skilled can be working and helping their teammates. You have to be a little careful with that. So design it so everyone can kind of be involved, but the person who has more skill can be like the person who's kind of, I don't know, the one sitting at the computer typing, but the others are able to interact. Yeah. All right. Well, given the time, let's go ahead and hand over to Julie, who's going to talk about the issue of like this tutorial governance. How do you maintain things? How do you, yeah.
Yeah. This is so fun. Eli, I'm so glad you proposed this session, and I love hearing like your like theory and approach and all the things you learn and do so thoughtfully as you design and teach tutorials. So yeah, I thought that I did not prepare slides, but I sort of prepared a little narrative, and I'll screen share, and we can look through some tutorials that have sort of inspired the way I think about this. And I know I see a lot of the NASA OpenScapes mentors here. I see Luis and Christine and Eric and Chris and maybe some others, and Miguel. Go ahead and we can tag team the cookbook tutorial governance when I get to that, because I think that'd be fun to hear your thoughts as well. As we're developing this together. But I thought that I would just start off. I'll start off just screen sharing. My notes are in our ESIP doc for this session, so I'll start off here. But so So I'm Julie Lowndes with OpenScapes, and yeah, I've got years long of joyful collaborations with Eli around tutorials and teaching. But I'll focus this around maintenance and governance and how we really bring this idea of developing tutorials collaboratively and thinking about future us when we're writing tutorials, and this kind of continual eye towards onboarding new people that can become contributors to tutorials and help either maintain them or govern them. So I'd love to hear what you all think about that too. Um, but I'm also a marine scientist like Eli. I'm a marine ecologist. And I learned how to code. I wouldn't say, I mean, kicking and screaming, but like it was not my goal. Like my goal was to um, study these really awesome squid and learn about their behavior and how it influenced fisheries and how that could be involved in conservation efforts more broadly. But I wasn't prepared to learn how to code. And it was a book called Practical Computing for Biologists that I still have right next to me that really had text and code together as a way to describe what and why you were going to code. And it really was impactful for me to learn how to code. So that during grad school really got me through learning how to code for myself and feeling the power of coding and really getting over the fear of coding and being able to identify as somebody that could write code and it could actually ask bigger questions than I had ever imagined. You know, the idea of a for loop and the fact that I could do the same thing 100 times as easily as I could do it twice, like that completely changed my like ideas as a scientist. And I also I saw how I could ask bigger questions than maybe even some of my committee members that didn't think in a coding way. So I think that it's been incredibly transformational for me. Um, and so then, but coding collaboratively and coding with an open mindset and in an open source way was something that I learned after graduate school. It was when I was at the University of California, Santa Barbara at NCEAS, and it's where we learned R together as a team with our Ocean Health Index group. So this is the first tutorial I really wanted to show. You know, this is a book called R for Data Science. I also have this one like as book form next to me. You can't see all my cool books. But this is a tutorial, right? This is each sort of chapter has text and code. The technology is improved using Quarto here, where you can copy code to your clipboard. So like I would read this book sort of nights and weekends and try things on my own. I could even get to a point where I didn't need to run all the code myself. I could read this book sort of for pleasure. It was amazing, right? Like to learn how to code, to learn, I'm just looking around. I didn't, anyway, there's description, there's ideas around plotting. It builds off of different bits of code. So it's like this really nice type of tutorial that's helping you learn how to code and really like talking to you as a learner, and really I think embodies a lot of the principles that it's just. So this book, R for Data Science, and then others in sort of the R world, Step 545 by Jenny Bryan, Happy Get with R. These were, yeah, they were so inviting to me as a, sort of a newcomer and as a new learner. But the whole tone of that really kept me with this, and I learned a ton. And it also it inspired me to start writing my own tutorials. So I went back into my GitHub and found this was like my first tutorial that I wrote. I mean, I think it was my first tutorial. This was in 2016, and it's a oh wait, no, it's not this one. It's linked from here. It's this one. Hang on. Okay, this was the first tutorial that I wrote. So this one doesn't have a ton of code, but it's like my talking points to a colleague friend of mine who I was Skyping with back in the day to introduce her to RStudio. She was an R user, but didn't know how to use this IDE that makes it friendlier to use. So I came up with this analogy that if R was an airplane that you could fly wherever you wanted to fly, RStudio is the airport that provides support and communications and troubleshooting and people and really is this game changer. So I walked through this tutorial screen sharing with Nina and showed her, this was like my cheat sheet, and I showed her my how these functions work, and we talked them through. And I think like it was neat. I mean, another element here is that my like teaching notes are public, right? I think that's another part of these tutorials that are so impactful, is like you're not only speaking to the learner and so the learner can read on their own, but also when you're a teacher, you're not having to split your attention into some other, facilitator notes or something. It's right here. And so, when Nina was then able to turn around and use these notes to teach somebody else, like that's really cool that we can like reuse teaching elements as well. Um, so I wrote other tutorials. This is another iteration of tutorials. So sort of has a similar look from the R for data science tutorials. It has this sort of like chapter table of contents thing here. And these were, in this example, Allison Horst and I are creating this tutorial collaboratively on GitHub. We're sitting next to each other, on mornings before work, laptops on our laps, building out these chapters, and we were able to develop them and communicate really easily with them. And so we were on a sort of a practical level, we were making decisions on the fly, the two of us. We were able to both use GitHub and push to main. We weren't using branches, right? We were able to talk to each other and make sure we're not going to have merge conflicts because we knew what each other were working on. And I think a lot of the sort of principles that we came to, I'm just going to come back to this Google Doc again for a moment. A lot of the principles that come into these types of tutorials come from Carpentry's instructor training and pedagogy, like Eli mentioned before. I was a scientist for years. I had taught all kinds of marine science classes and TA'd. I'd never had any kind of training in how to teach. Carpentry's instructor training was my first entry into the word pedagogy, the idea of how learners learn, the idea of empathy, and how you can bring that into your teaching. So that was hugely influential for me. I don't have enough time to get into all the things that influence me, but Mozilla Open Leaders was another thing, really mixing open source technology with leadership and with like values, like bringing values of open into your project with technology assisting. So these principles kind of really helped shape a lot of these tutorials. And I think that I also then started thinking about, just moving this down here, the sort of concepts around documenting things. And I think tutorials come into play here too, like having a place to put things, have an audience in mind when you're writing them down, and design them for readability and accessibility. So sort of bringing these principles into our tutorials. Mm-hmm. And something that came up when we were building these tutorials too was thinking about having like a single source of truth where something lives, but then also having something that's sort of stable in time for an audience to come back to. And like, how do you do that so that as an audience, if you give them a URL, that URL is still going to work for them, and it's going to be something that they can come back to. Maybe they've bookmarked it. But then if things change, if like how do you square that? How do you update something and also not continually have to update something forever if you've moved on? But how do you balance that? So I think that'll be interesting to talk about more with with the discussion later. But I'll give you one example of sort of how I think about maintenance in this R for Excel users example, because one example of maintenance here is, if you go down to maybe chapter 7, where we're talking about pivoting data and how a learner might want to take wide format data and pivot it into longer format data. There's a command called pivot longer in R that does this, but it didn't used to be called pivot longer. It used to be called pivot wide or some other thing, right? So like some part of our maintenance was having to go and update a function when the function changed that we wanted to teach. So that's an example of maintenance. Another example of maintenance might be if you notice, this book looks similar to the R for Data Science book, but R for Data Science is a little more modern looking. This is made with Quarto, which is kind of the new way of creating these books versus R Markdown, which this one is, that was only able to work with R, whereas Quarto is able to work with Python and Julia and other things natively. So kind of so you could argue that this R for Excel users could be maintained a little bit better if it shifted into Quarto. And so there's different levels of maintenance with these tutorials. Okay, so that's some reminiscing about sort of my personal entryway into tutorial building. But I wanted to share now more about NASA OpenScapes and the tutorials that we've built with the mentors. And so please, all mentors, please be prepared to chip in. I'll give a little context. So the NASA OpenScapes mentors, this is a group of scientific experts across the NASA distributed active archive centers who are holding decades of knowledge around NASA missions, around data, around user needs. And what our NASA OpenScapes mentor community is where this cross data center community that's really focused on teaching and supporting users and learners. And we do that through building a lot of tutorials and teaching, and then seeing what else folks need and building to support that. So the Earth Data Cloud Cookbook is something that we started pretty early on, like realizing that we needed to have we needed to have a place to put things that we were developing. We had to have an audience in mind, which was ourselves first, as we were learning how to use the cloud with NASA Earth Data so that we could teach others, and then designing for readability and accessibility as we went. So this Earth Data Cloud Cookbook was this place where we could build this collection of tutorials that we were building together. And we really had a teaching forward approach. So we would build a tutorial for an audience, teach that audience, and sort of vet the tutorial and bring it into the cookbook here. And it was through that kind of teaching and focus on tutorials that we also identified this need for what is now the Earth Access Python library. So this sort of teaching and tutorial building has been a big part of our work together. Okay, so with maintenance here, I mean, when we first started building this cookbook, Earth Access didn't exist, right? We had sections about accessing Earth NASA Earth data that was 30 lines of bash code that was complex and creating secret keys. Eli was there as one of those learners in that first hackathon. Um, and so we part of the maintenance of the cookbook was to then go through and remove that kind of bash code approach and replace it with Earth Access as we were building it, as we were teaching it, as new functions for Earth Access came to be. So like there's that level of maintenance that we still have our eyes on here, and then you can start thinking about, well, maybe those, some of that could go in the Earth Access documentation and not need to be reproduced here. Like, what's the balance between redundancy and where things live? But there's that kind of eye towards maintenance in these tutorials. But then I think it's here when we were working with developing the cookbook is really when the idea of governance came into being. Because when I said before, when Allison Horst and I were sitting next to each other, being able to talk exactly about what we were doing, we were the only people deciding. We were doing it synchronously. We could both figure that out on our own. Here we had many people distributed, working in different hours. And we figured out our governance by onboarding ourselves into the process and making decisions together and documenting them and like sort of building that into the tutorial process. So I think if I was thinking about principles that we had for governance around people, process, and technology. So our idea for people was really to make the implicit explicit. So saying who could contribute, how to, like Eli was saying, like sort of stripping away what doesn't need to be said, but then also thinking deeply about what does need to be said, right? Like, do folks know how to uncomment in Python, for example? Like, how do we make the implicit explicit? How do we onboard learners as contributors? So how can somebody read our cookbook and learn how it works and learn how to contribute to it and feel empowered to? And how we think about psychological safety and a growth mindset throughout this process. But the process for our governance was around diataxis, and I'll show this here as a quick way to grab this. So this is the idea of like when you're thinking of documentation and reference materials, what's the purpose of them? So we've really tried to focus and sort of check ourselves with this idea of, are you trying to be understanding oriented, and then it's maybe like long form explanation? Are you being learner oriented, like tutorials, or problem oriented for how-to guides? So you'll see kind of the tutorials and how-to on sections over here. And then the technology. So with we're all using GitHub. We all couldn't use the main branch anymore. We had to learn what branches were, how to think about using them, we had discussions about, let's consider branches to be kind of temporary to solve a discrete purpose, and then you delete them. So you're trying to not build a branch that gets bigger and bigger and harder to merge back in. How are pull requests going to be managed? How do we have a review process for our tutorials? So we were thinking about how to use these technologies and putting a contributor chapter directly in the tutorials itself. Okay, I'm going to shift to where we are now. So we're right now thinking about, we're calling sort of this shorthand as cookbook visioning or tutorial unification. So we've really been growing a coalition of learning resources across the NASA data centers. And at the same time, there's an effort to unify the NASA Earth Data website, which is really exciting. And I'm going to show this one slide that we just presented at ESIP. showing that, yeah, the NASA Earth Data website, there are learning resources now on the website, they're called data in action, data recipes, tutorials, and webinars. And the cookbook is now a featured tutorial, which is really exciting this GitHub backed code based tutorials are findable across the website. And one of the things that we're interested in is leveraging this whole open source software and collaborative governance approach that we've established with the cookbook, and helping this meld together with web unification. So we're trying to think about how to sort of level up the governance that we've developed across the DACs and include more people in it, include more structures as needed. There's a lot more decisions to make, but this is something I think that this group really feels like we're ready to take on and really want to offer our services. So there's ideas here around like hub and spoke architecture. So you can see, I guess, on this screenshot or here that there's other cookbooks that live in different places, that have different focuses, that have different audiences, and that's great, right? Because learners trust and look to these different places. But how can we also help them be more findable? How do we think about this in more of a federated way rather than a centralized way? And so we're learning, we're figuring this out and trying to do this openly as we go. So we're excited to shape this and talk with you all about it more. So I'll stop there and see if any mentor wants to share more or where we want to take this. And then I know Eli has another slide deck as well.
I will just comment, like getting to the point of what the page that Julie is showing, like that cookbook structure, that is hard to get to and to agree on that as a group. But also like I've found like it's not really something that I could write from the get-go, because there's a lot of learning about what structures work. Like if you looked at the structure that they used in the one that I attended, the first one they did in 2021, it looked different than the current structure.
Mm-hmm.
Right? They learned a lot along the way by watching how people interacted with their learning material, and then they came back and changed things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. I think Tim's comment has been really interesting to watch. Like, so there's this thing about deciding to like create it as a book, and there's kind of a commitment about, or there can be a commitment about maintenance. You don't have to have the commitment. You can say, I create the book and then I just say, yeah, that's the version there. And it's kind of like an archive. But if you create something, it's like, no, we're going to like keep maintaining this. So for a certain amount of time, it can help change how people approach the problem. So like, as Tim mentions there, like there's this recipe that's out there and it's used in this material, and as more people use that material, people start to adopt that recipe. And so like kind of organically, rather than everyone doing things slightly differently, they start kind of merging, and then that makes it easier for everyone to learn because there's not 50 different ways to do things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And when we've identified issues with like people are not using sessions properly with EDL, instead of having to try and convince every user to change how they store sessions and cookies in their environment, we could talk to Earth Access and work with them to figure out the right way to do it. And then over time, almost everyone is using that now. So that huge like multiplier effect.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. All right, given the time, so that we have some more time at the end, I want to jump into my third presentation, which is something kind of different. Hopefully it'll be fun. Let's see here. Window. Okay. I want to talk about creating this experiential journey of it was a 4-hour workshop. And this was a fairly different type of learning event. And so a lot of the workshops, the Hack Weeks learning material I present, it's a bit more like a stereotypical, I'm presenting a tutorial, and then at the end the students are kind of working on that. We're wandering around and kind of helping them on things. This was really different. So we decided we wanted to create an event. It was a 4-hour workshop at the Women in Statistics and Data Science as an entry to Git and GitHub for people who are brand new or who had tried it and hadn't had much success. So, so we were very clear at the beginning that this was for entry. And then we decided that so we put that in, and then we needed to make some high-level decisions about our workshop. So this is before we start working on it. So we decide what is our. So this is when we're writing the abstract for it. So who's the target audience? So this one, we are very clear. It's for beginners. We select the content, which we need to put in the abstract. We decide that we are going to focus on project management and kind of teamwork on a project, using GitHub to help a team do a task. And then so that was for the abstract. And then we talk and we decide what kind of structure we're going to use. So the lecture kind of structure, where I stand up and present that material, we walk through the code, that's just one type of learning experience you can create. And we decided not to do that kind. We decided we wanted to do kind of a mini Hack Week where they work on a project, they develop something together, and so a very experiential. And then we decide that we will use a presenter MC format rather than tag team. So I use tag team maybe mostly like I'm giving a tutorial, then my co-presenter's giving them a tutorial. We just said we're not going to do that. We're going to do presenter and MC, and I'll talk about what that format looks like. All right. So, so we decided we wanted to use that experiential learning. So we leaned on, in thinking about that and the elements that were going to be in that, so leaned on the ideas around experiential learning cycles. In my teaching as a ski instructor, I've been deeply involved in this. I have a lot of experience in this in other contexts, and also in Hack Weeks we think about this. And so, and when you're doing that, you're trying to have these elements in it, this sort of active experimentation, the concrete experience, which is where they're working on their project, give them some time to reflect, observe, and then the abstract conceptualization is where you're like just delivering, here's how you do it. So we very intentionally are incorporating this into our design. Why did we do this? My co-instructor and I, Emily, we both really love to teach, and we thought it'd be a fun challenge. We also thought that a workshop on Git and GitHub for 4 hours might put people to sleep. And so this would be really fun. Again, it suited our teaching styles too. We're pretty high energy. So like I said, we decided we would do this presenter MC format. And this worked for us because of kind of our personalities too. I don't know if I could pull off the MC. The MC is like your hype man, in this case, hype woman. They're really going to keep the energy up. They read the room. They bring energy, curiosity. They ask the dumb questions. They just, they bring a lot of presence and energy. And Emily, that kind of role comes naturally to her. And so she was really game for taking on that role. And then I, on the other hand, would be like the content presenter. I'm, in charge of one, kind of the drier content, but also in charge of the logical flow and structure during the workshop. Okay, so this kind of separation of roles was very intentional on our part. Okay, so we created this workshop in 3 2-hour sessions. So we had to come in very fast, and during those 2 hours, work on very specific things and get to done very quickly. So the first 2-hour session, we needed to draft the overall structure. We started with brainstorming what would be the project. We needed to come up with a project that we thought was kind of doable. We want to have highest success rate. It needs to be simple enough, hopefully be kind of fun, but like pretty easy to follow. And we spitballed a lot of different ideas. And then we came up, I think Emily suggested, hey, let's do like a guide for the St. Louis area, like a little like markdown files. And we're like, okay, that'll work. Great. Good enough. We go with that. So that was kind of for a lot of things. It was like, that's good enough. Let's go with that idea. The next thing we needed to kind of decide is what would be the structure for that. And we tried to do something be pretty simple and high success rate. So in this case, they're going to create these markdown files in Teams. We also decide that a lot of the learning is going to be by doing. So a lot of it's going to be activity based. And then this is kind of a key bit here that we decided was just like we're scaffolding the overall structure, and we decide 3 45-minute progressive blocks. And that is going to create this overall structure. And then we also realized, though, because we were kind of talking it over, that none of these people know each other. Now we're asking them to do this weird, like, experiential activity, working in teams, and they're and it's like, oh my God, that, if they don't like loosen up, this isn't going to work. So our warm-up activity, we spent a lot of time this first session, like coming up with ideas. And we came up with a game that was like a Kanban, where they created a zoo it was actually on their desk using Post-it notes and tape. And then I think there was a name that Emily has, like Zootopia or something like that. Anyhow, you just, it's a team thing where you create this game. And that was real great because it got them immediately learning their teammates, and then also learning a Kanban. So a Kanban is you have task, doing, done. And this is kind of what we were teaching them during the session, was how to create something using Kanban and GitHub. The second, so we did that, and that was done. And then the next thing is, then we worked on our own a bit and created like scaffolding of the material of our repository. And then the next one, we had to decide what's going in these blocks. And that was it kind of for our preparation. It was very, very fast. And then the third one, we ran through the whole workshop. And when you're doing an event like this, actually the content, you do have to be careful, but for sure. But a lot of it is like run of show. It's kind of like a play. Think of it like a play. Who's coming in now? Who's coming out? And those that kind of run a show in this kind of, if you're running this kind of experiential thing, this is really important. So we needed to identify the key transitions, write notes on the key transitions, who was doing what at that moment, the props, who was responsible, and then we figured out this warm-up game was super important. The warm-up game and then the final activity were going to be places where students could go off the rails. So we spent a lot of time practicing. All right. So like I said, this game was super important. And I think like a key thing was us to recognize how important it was to get the energy level high. Energy level high and people laughing and warmed up. So, and we needed to create a game that hardly any instruction needed and they could just jump in. So the game was, they got Post-it notes, Sharpies, and instruction, create your zoo. And the only instruction was you have 5 minutes to create task that you put in your task thing. Everyone creates task for your board. And then when we say go, you grab a task, somebody else's task. You can't pick one of your own. And then you do the task and then you put it into done. And then you go and you grab another task and put it into done. You can talk during the first task writing part. And this was like a perfect game, like super easy to explain. And then they had a lot of fun. So we came out of that with, they were laughing and they got to talk about their little zoos they made. And the energy level is really high, which is what you need for this kind of event. And then next we go into the activity blocks. And so here, we use these, so we thought a lot about the structuring. And again, so we're using this MC kind of thing. So I would present the concept or whatever task we are doing. So like editing a file in GitHub and committing it. So we practice that. And then I would hand it off and say, hey, Emily, can you show us this? Emily goes through and does the exact task again, but she's kind of doing it in her way as a learner and also bringing this kind of MC energy to it. And so remember how I talked about like it's really important to create these kind of breaks and create repetition. And there's different ways you can do that. And this was a different structure to create that repetition by having a different person, the other instructor, represent the task as a student. And then we would have the students do the activity. Okay, so let's see just kind of what this looks like. I'll put this in the chat so you can, if you want to study this later, if I can find it.
You might have to reshare so we can see.
Yeah. Let me just put that there. Chat. Yeah, good enough. Let's go with that. Yeah, that's very important. All right, here. Okay, so I'm here. And if you look here, you can see kind of all our material. In particular, these are the slides that we were working from. And what I want to show is the, so like if you look here, so this is basically, hey, these are the learning objectives. And again, it's helping us as instructors stay on point. This is what we're doing. A lot of talking about this idea of yes and rather than no but. And that was also the point with the game. Like we needed to get them in their minds into yes and mode. And the game really helped them because we were like, everything goes for the game. Like if somebody says, we need a dinosaur in the zoo, response, yes. And that dinosaur needs really big fences. All right. And just getting them into that mode. And it's much easier if you can get an activity that helps them get into that mode rather than just saying, hey, everyone be in yes and mode. So there you go. This was all the instructions they got. It worked great. We just left this up on the board and it was perfect. Right? Like so easy. They could just able to do it. And then, so I don't want to show that one. Okay, well, I'll show this one. So this is an example of one of the activities. So we were showing them these Kanban boards in the game, and then we're showing that with project boards. So the first activity is they're creating idea boards for when they're working on their markdown for, like, I don't know, restaurants around the convention center. And so we give them these simple tasks. And I also made YouTube videos, a really short clip of me doing each task. And this is to help people who spaced out while I was talking, or I went too fast or whatever, trying to help them out. It didn't take very long, but it helped them feel like they didn't have to ask a dumb question. And so we would just get them started. And yeah, it worked really, really well. Each one was kind of the same. Each activity. So like this activity, we moved them just getting experience editing files in a browser. Yeah, so you can kind of look through there how we spread out the task. I'm going to stop there though, and yeah, we can talk. We also put some things for a silent reflection, but we've had really great discussions afterwards. So I think we'll just continue having discussion for the last bit here. So open up the floor.
Anyone can unmute yourself, turn on your video. You can also raise your hand with the React icon in the bottom. Or continue posting to chat.
I love like the emphasis on the icebreaker and like the intention of the goal of the icebreaker and how you design that. Sounds super fun.
Yes, and we went around and around with that. We came up with the zoo idea pretty quickly, but we didn't come up with the idea to make it a Kanban board. And then realized one that made it more fun. But also we were like, oh, wow, then that leads into the task. And so it made it easier for us to ask them to do this silly thing. It was like, I know you just came here to learn GitHub, but this is really teaching you a skill about using project boards. Yeah. So I think that was kind of key. They felt like, oh, okay, we're actually learning something. Christine.
So I'm the killjoy who hates icebreakers. Love it. They just like, especially like ones that seem like they'll be embarrassing or they just seem unpleasant. So like, how did you balance finding something that like people were going to be willing to do, but was going to actually get them like in the right frame of mind? And how did you manage to like, did you have any trouble getting some folks to participate?
Yeah, we had no trouble getting anyone to participate. And we thought about this. This is women in statistics, right? Like it's like guaranteed, like 75% of these women are introverts. So nobody had to talk. You didn't have to raise your hand and say, what flavor ice cream do you feel like you are, or anything like that. And you could just be your introvert self and write task. And you kind of did your task alone. You didn't have to really, you you didn't have to interact with people at all. You just wrote your task, and then you could grab whichever task you wanted and do your own thing. And then at the end, we did say, hey, describe the zoo. So it did require one person from the group to be able to say that. But all the introverts who didn't want to say anything could just keep quiet. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. So, yeah, we did think about that, okay, we cannot have a game that is going to be hard for introverted people, because that's not going to work. And we didn't want to start the day with like people feeling like they're put on the spot and embarrassed or anything.
Right. Right.
And Puneet has a great question. I mean, these like thorny questions around governance and stewardship of training, tutorials, workshops, webinars, and continuing education. Asks, do we need more bodies for that? Is this things that ESIP covers? And also notes that they're skeptical of that a body needs to exist.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely we've been talking about this a little bit with the cookbook visioning and thinking about how like a shared vision and processes are important, but also I don't know, federated approach where things live in different places is also important at this stage. I don't know. I'm curious what other folks think. And also, I don't know how much the ESIP community as a whole is working on this.
I would guess if they are, it's in the relevant clusters. Staff is not, because we are helping just bring people together.
I think I have experienced it in groups like the NASA OpenScapes Mentors. So I see this because I'm part of Ocean Hack Week, and we've taught that for many, many years, and we have lots of tutorials. And so we've thought a lot about, how do we just have so much resources there? How do we make that more valuable? But it's so much effort to do that. And so instead, we do have the website. So what we have is that the materials are archived and they're in like a book, and you can go back and see all materials from previous years. Abigail.
Hi, thanks. So just more of a comment of I'm newly in the data science and geoinformatics realm. So like teaching others how to use different tools, be it GitHub or Python, is so necessary in like every branch of science. But what's never been addressed in any workshop I've been to is the pedagogy behind it and how they actually built that workshop, thinking of the participants' mindsets and where they're coming from and how to meet them where they are. And that I was in a workshop last week that was on a Magma modeling tool that formerly had a GUI, but they shifted it to Python. And of the 65 participants, Python was the biggest hurdle of telling people, hey, click in that box and delete the hashtag. And it was a nightmare for the first day out of a 3-day workshop. So I just really appreciate what you all have put together here and also the open source materials that you all have shared that will be really helpful in the future. So thank you.
Thanks, Abigail. Glad this was useful, and it was fun to articulate a lot of the thinking and things we learned. So thanks for the chance to do that. Yeah,
I think it's very true. Like we don't talk about like the kind of the meta part of how you're constructing it, and having been part of a lot of big hack weeks, that whole organization part, we put a lot of thought and intentionality into how we're designing events and how we're designing our materials, how we're supporting our learners. But you don't see that, right? You don't see that. Nobody, and it's not something that we talk about unless you were in those organizing groups, and then you talk about it a lot.
That is very true, but I feel like you do see it as a participant in the workshop
Mm.
when it's going smoothly and everyone's learning together. It's like,
Yeah.
wow, this is so great, versus things getting stuck up somewhere and then the workshop does not go smoothly. So,
Mhm.
Well, that is at time. If there are any other questions, please feel free to put in chat really quick or raise your hand. Otherwise, you know, Eli and Julia, I'm sure you want people to contact you with questions.
Yeah, feel free to
Yeah,
reach out to
please.
us.